Greetings, students. Tonight I'm going to give you a short audio lecture over organizational structure. This chapter kind of defines and describes the key factors in designing an organizational structure. And so what we're going to talk about is a little bit about how to analyze a structure that is existing and maybe how to restructure an organization. It tends to be one of the fastest ways to make organizational change. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the most effective. But that said, an organizational structure formally dictates how jobs and tasks are divided among and coordinated between individuals and groups within the company. I'm wondering if you could draw an organizational chart of your own company. Most of us cannot. Most of us cannot even imagine how intricate an organization like Devon and Sandridge and government and even academia might be, because typically large organizations have evolved over time and the charts are not out of a textbook. And so let's talk about why do some organizations have different structures than others? Well, it's because of what makes up the organizational structure, such as, and I'm going to try to advance these slides. I don't know if I can or not, but I will. What you see here is two typical organizational structures. The one on top is the more hierarchical and reminds me kind of a Christmas tree, and the second one, the lower one, is like horizontal or flat organization. Now, what makes these different is the way in which jobs are divided up. There could be highly specialized jobs where people only do one kind of thing. It can also change based on chain of command, who reports to whom, and how the authority flows down through the levels of the organization. And in some organizations, there are very complex chains of command with people reporting to two or more managers. Also, we have differences in span of control, and that typically, I think of the classic span of control as 6 people reporting to one manager. However, in a more horizontal organization, a flatter organization, we may see as many as 20, 30, 40 or more people reporting to one manager. So we typically describe span of controls in terms of narrow spans of control with close working relationships. That's the classic view, which increases the cost of labor and it causes employees to become sometimes micromanaged. Then we also have a wider span of control. And in a wide span of control, we tend to see people who are self-starters, do not need a lot of management, and maybe they have a number of roles, a number of tasks, a number of skill sets where they have been cross-trained for. Another factor that's important in organizational structure is centralization. We describe an organization as being centralized or decentralized. And centralization simply says where decisions are made in the organization. And if you say an organization is centralized, then that means managers at the top of the organizational chart are making the decisions. If it's decentralized, managers at the bottom of the organization can make decisions, and anywhere in between. The last element of organizational structure is what we call formalization. Formalization refers to the number of rules and procedures. We have organizations like the military, like the Postal Service, like many of our government bureaucracies, large, older companies that have a prescribed way of doing their business, and there are a number of rules and procedures that must be followed. Also, you think of a manufacturing business, that you have to have standardized ways of manufacturing. And so, we call these organizations formal. So let's advance on to how some of these elements are combined. And the next slide is showing you the relationship between span of control and organizational performance. Obviously, you can see if you have a narrow span of control and people are not willing and able to do their job, the performance level is going to be low. And if you have a wide span of control and the people are not skilled and able, then we're going to also have low performance. So ideally, when people are trained and willing and able, we can delegate work to them and we can see a higher level of performance. Now, I've already discussed with you the elements of organizational structure. So now let's talk about how we combine these elements. And they typically describe types of organization. So we have the mechanistic organization and the organic organization. Those are two extremes. If I was going to draw on the board, I would say that we have mechanistic on one end of the continuum and organic on the other end. We have organic, which is flexible, it's adaptive, they rely on low levels of formalization, multiple chains of command, low levels of work specialization, wide spans of control. The mechanistic, or sometimes people call it bureaucratic, is more efficient, more predictable, more standardized. These are companies that thrive in a very stable environment. Now, we have many, many organizations in between. Okay, let's look at organizational design and look at just some of the typical ways that we differentiate organizations based on the business environment. When we look at the business environment, we're really talking about the external environment. We're talking about competition. We're talking about social environment, political environment, all these external forces that are coming in to influence the organizational structure. And at one time, we would say a stable environment might be an example of a stable environment may be like the Postal Service. However, we know that that's changed because now we're hearing, the Postal Service is going to stop Saturday delivery and they're how many billions of dollars in debt. And we saw over the past 10 years that the competition came through package delivery by UPS and et cetera. So we wouldn't really call that a very stable environment. We might have once said the oil and gas business was a stable environment, but we know that that's going through tremendous change too, the whole energy sector. A dynamic environment in recent years we probably call technology, especially like computer technology, phone technology, TV technology. That's a dynamic, and dynamic simply means changing environment. So when we have a changing environment and you match that with business strategy, okay, we look at strategy, technology, and company size as well. We may see a differentiation strategy going along with an organic structure because it's in a dynamic environment. So we've got lots of fast change. We have to be different and unusual. Otherwise, we get gobbled up by in the marketplace. And therefore, the structure we need is to be flat. Decisions can be made on the lower levels, and we can move through the decision-making process and really the communication process at a very rapid speed. Okay, other features of structure include technology. Um, this is the method that organization transforms their inputs into outputs. And research suggests that the more routine an organization is, then, I mean, back up. The more routine a technology is, the more mechanistic a structure should be. Okay, so if the technology is routine, let's say we're Bama pies and we are making biscuits for McDonald's, and the recipe has not changed in years. The only thing that has changed is demand. And so we would say that this is probably going to be based on a low cost product strategy with a very mechanistic kind of structure because it's routine technology. And we also have to consider company size. The larger an organization becomes, the more likely it will be to have a mechanistic design. It doesn't have to, but it typically is. However, don't be surprised to see very large organizations with units. They could be strategic units. They might be wholly owned subsidiaries. They may be departments that have a varying structure which meets the output of the job and also the satisfaction of the employees. So the common forms are very simple structures and the very bureaucratic structure. Some of you may have grown up in a family business, and it's the simple structure is typically a small organization with one or a few at the top. One person may be the owner manager, and maybe the company with this simple structure may have little specialization, very little formalization. I think of restaurants around town may fall into that category. Small design shops. And then the opposite would be the bureaucratic organizations, and the one that we see most often is a functional structure. Okay, here's an example of that small restaurant. 6 people in the organization, owner, manager. Each person has a separate and not terribly sophisticated job description. And then we see one that is a flat organization. It's functional because typically all related processes are in one department, and they may not work in groups. They may not have a lot of cross-functional training, cross-functional thinking, cross-functional discussion. This is very typical of early organizations. Here are examples of other structures, multi-divisional structures. Here's one that is based on product structure. Here's one based on geographic structures. This one has been used by, large companies like Procter & Gamble, IBM. We also have client structures. And then the one that is possibly the most complex is called a matrix structure. Now, in an academic organization, faculty actually operate in a matrix structure, and administration operates in a more of a functional structure. So there we have an organization that has two types of structure. The matrix structure is very flexible and allows organizations to put together teams based on employees' experience and skills. And it typically gives an employee two chains of command, two groups with which to interact, and two sources of information to consider. Now, we think about how difficult this structure is to coordinate. It can be extremely effective because you can spread your expertise, but it can also be challenging because of communication. For example, I may work in the undergraduate and the graduate program. I may teach one subject in one and one in another. I may not teach it all in continuing ed, while I might also teach overseas. So this is a complex structure that utilizes pockets of expertise. So you might ask, how important is structure? And I think it's important to remember that changes to an organization structure can have some negative effects. When we talk about restructuring, sometimes we're trying to simplify the structure. Sometimes we're trying to lower our overhead. Sometimes we're trying to reduce duplication. Sometimes we have decided to outsource. So we might be motivated for a number of reasons. But what we find is that restructuring causes a lot of fear and anxiety, as any substantial organizational change will cause. But we truly lose some productivity. Performance may have some negative effects. People are afraid. People wonder, how is this going to affect me? Who's my new boss? How can I, show them that I want to keep my job? Am I going to be the next one to be axed? So there's considerable anxiety that is brought on by restructuring. Organizations today frequently restructure, often laying off managers in an attempt to create a flatter organization. What we see is perhaps a CEO who's determined to raise the stock price of a company at all costs. And the most expedient way to do that in that leader's way, however, there may be many options, is to lay off more people within the company. And another person may not believe that this is the correct or even ethical course of action, but the CEO sees the bottom line as the driver of the stock price, and so they make the decision. It's a centralized, more bureaucratic organization, and their mind is on the major stock stakeholders. And so, the decision is made, the stock does increase, and people are left without jobs, and then we have to go through a whole another scenario with the effects of restructuring. So let's think about restructuring and how structure impacts culture. One of the best ways in which managers can help a restructuring to succeed is to help people and to manage the guilt and the remorse felt by the laid off survivors. The people who survive, who don't leave the company, when they are given a stronger sense of control and communicating with them frequently and honestly, they can better understand and adapt to the new structure. Okay, this audio is going to end, and the next audio will take up with the subject of organizational culture. Thank you.